This is very unusual for me to do an online presentation. It feels a little bit weird. I'm glad there's still 120 people after this short mistake of the technical issues. So my name is Alan. I like to run a lot and I like to present also a lot. A few years ago, I started my own company, database consultancy in the Netherlands, and I'm more like a freelance Oracle APEX developer. Most of the times I do Oracle APEX, but so now and then I also try to combine APEX and Oracle Jet. I am an Oracle Ace, and you can find me on Twitter. So, this is not an official Oracle Ace groundbreaker slide, but I like this cartoon so much because it pretty says what I'm doing. I'm not trying to convince you to do exactly the things I do. I just want you to see different ways of solving problems. And I would like to share that with you, so you can maybe use part of it. All my examples that are used in this presentation are tested in the Always Free cloud. I opened it and it immediately worked all. So there are lots of nice examples on how to access your free database and your free APEX instance. So just take a look at it. So why am I doing a presentation about connecting to some kind of service provider, payment service provider? Why do I think it's useful for you? But first, I started at my customer. They needed a payment portal, so they needed something where they can, where is in his web shop, his clients can pay for the things they buy. And the second one was that during that process, I used a lot of techniques that were very cool to use. And all these techniques, I've seen these before, but never in one presentation. And maybe there was a reason for that. But now I tried it to do it in one presentation, and it went pretty well, I think. So I hope we can make it in time again. And I'd like to explain you what I did to create this portal for this customer. So at first, I needed to start looking for a service provider. And a payment service provider is more like taking care of all the payments on your page. So they offer you the possibility to pay via various set of banks. So if you want to pay via PayPal or a Visa card or a bank, a specific bank, you can use a payment provider to do this. All the transactions are safe, so you don't have to worry about that. You just only have to deal with this payment provider. This payment provider takes care of the rest. And after the client has paid, you get a confirmation that the order is paid. So there's a lot of payment providers out there. And I don't know which one are Dutch or German or international. You have to look it up for yourself in your own country, what you need. I use Molly. I think Molly is typical Dutch payment provider, but I'm not sure. So I'm not talking about this Molly, but I'm talking about that Molly. So and this Molly supports a lot of payment providers, a lot of payment methods like Visa or different kind of banks. So the first thing to do when you've chosen a payment provider is to set it up. And this is in fact a very important thing because in this setup, you set up important parts of your payments. So you set up, of course, your email address and your website and your phone numbers, but you also set up what kind of payments people can do. Like in the Netherlands, we can use Ideal. but you also can use Apple Pay or credit cards or PayPal. And the client that connects to your site and wants to pay, get a list of all those payment options to pay with. So if you choose PayPal, people can pay with PayPal from your site via this payment provider. So that means you will be redirected from your site to this payment provider. And Molly offers a nice background. You can change the way this Molly page looks, so it looks more like your page when the customer does his payment. So once you've set up your account, it takes a couple of days because it's all double checked by Molly employees. They check if you are worthy, if you can accept these payments. And while waiting, you can read the manual. And luckily for you, I did it. So there's a lot of information. It's described so tremendously big. There's different APIs. You can read a lot. So what I wanted to do for this presentation, I want to just pick one or two parts of this manual and explain it to you. And the easiest way to explain it is to use list payments. So what you can do is just you do like a call, or you call the API, and then you get the list of all the payments that has been done, and you want to present it in the APEX. So let's go back to the manual. And this is like an example of how many payment APIs there are. And practically for the situation I was in with the customer, I used two of them. And one of them is the payment API. And in the payment API, you can create a payment. And if you walk to the manual, you see that there's a good description on how to create a payment. And the other thing I want to do is also in the payment API, I want to list payments. And that's where I'm going to start with. But how can I list payments without having any payments already in this list? So that's why I want to ask you to all scan this barcode. And why $100 or euros or for the COVID Molly demo. So we have a list that you can use later on in the presentation. But thank you for that. So now we have this list. And in the documentation, I can find a nice curl example. And in this curl example, it explains how to connect to the Molly server. So before we go to APEX, we're just going to use this curl example first to test the connection. And what you see in this example is that there's an authorization bearer in there. And this header variable, you can use it to make clear who's connecting to this server. So we need to remember this because I want to tell you more later on in the presentation about this. So I went to quick. So if you in the documentation is also not only the message you want to send is described over there, but also the message you receive. So the responding message is also presented in this presentation or in this documentation. So this is pretty large text what you're getting back, and we know exactly what we're getting back. And that's very nice, I think. So let's test the connection first. So curl is the program we use to send a message. And the protocol we're using is GET. So we're getting the payments from the server. And this is the server we're talking to. And we need to pass on a variable for the authorization. And the authorization, there are two authorization keys. So in the setup, there's this API key and a live key. So you can switch between these keys to connect to the test environment or the live environment. And you can also change the keys over here. So we make use of the test connection. And what I got back is this result in my command line. So now I know that I can connect from my server to the Molly server via curl. So the basic connection is done. So now I'm ready to test this connection with APEX. In APEX, we need web source modules for it. So we are consuming web sources, we are consuming REST interfaces, and we need to use web sources to communicate with it. For that, we can go to shared components and we create a web source module. And what I see as the web source module is that it is like an API hook, like a representation of the API, what's on the Molly server. So in this case, I have the payment API and the method API. And both APIs are separate web source modules. So in these APIs, I can create my calls to the API, like the list payment. So we follow the wizard to create an API, to create a web source module from scratch. For that, we use a simple HTTP protocol because we're not connecting to an ODS or Oracle Cloud server. And we need to create a name. And in this name, this name, on some places, this name, you can choose it from a drop-down list. And on other places, you need to use the name as a static constant. So I like to use underscores with it because I always do my static constant with an underscore. But it's up to you. You can also use spaces. So then you fill in the endpoint. And then you go to the next page. And on the next page, you want to create your remote server. So in APEX, the remote server is a separate thing. You set up the remote server separately so you can use it between different web sources. In this, in the wizard, the remote server is created automatically. So you set up the base URL and you set up the URL path. And the URL path for this API is the payments, the /v2/payments. We don't want to use an all-out authentication in my case. You can, but we don't want to use it. So what I do in this case, I press discover immediately. So what APEX does is making a connection to the Molly server and test this connection. And what we see over here is that we get a result from the Molly server. So that means that the connection between the APEX and the Molly server is there. So that's the good thing. The bad thing is that we're missing the authentication, or that we failed to authenticate. And that's what I told you, we have to remember. Let's get one step back. We have to remember to do some kind of authentication. Well, there's also this advanced button over here. And if you press this button, you can define HTTP header variables. And over here, I could put in my authorization header variable. So after doing that, I press discover again, and I got a result. So that's great. That quickly, as I tell you over here, that quickly it works. You even see that there's some kind of data profile created. So more on that later. So let's create the web source. Now the web source is created, you will be sent to the detail page of the web source. And you see that there are operations. There's one operation, the get operation. And this operation is a representation of the list payments in the web. So the web source module is the payments API, and the operations are the separate like the list payment or the create or cancel payment. So let's create a page on it and see what the server returns. You can use the wizard for that, and if you use the wizard, let's create an interactive report immediately on this page. We give it some name, and we'd like to create a menu entry, give it a name. And on the last page of the interactive report wizard, you can choose a data source. So usually we use the local database for the data source. Over here, you could choose the web source. And in the next field, you can choose which web source module you want to choose. Well, in this case, this is my payment API test. And immediately, the columns are displayed in the select columns list. So we just select all columns and we like to see them. You can also change the settings later on if you already created your interactive report. So let's run the page, and it's a little bit small, or that depends on your screen, of course. Maybe you have a big wide screen in front of you. So what you can see over here, there's only zero rows, and there's some information, some URLs, but not really payment information. So that's what I talked about. If there's no data yet, it's 0 rows. So somehow the discoverer didn't find the right columns. So let's see how that comes. How can we change that? So we go back to the web source module. And what you can see, you see in the middle on the right, you see this edit data profile button. And if you push this button, you can edit the data profile. And this is automatically generated by APEX. And because there was no rows, some sub-object of the JSON string didn't contain any values. So it wasn't visible by APEX. So only these rows, the top rows, were imported. So what I did, I connected to a different server where there was data, and I pushed the Rediscover data profile button. So this button tries to reload the JSON and get all the columns that are in this JSON. And now, because I have data, the list is much longer. Even the list is so long that I don't really know what is what, and it's all like flattened out. So I noticed that the JSON that I got back, I got a separate part which says payments. So I only need this part, payments. I don't need the count, and I don't need to embed in the links. So I need to set up that somehow. So what you see over here, the data profile, how the data profile looks when there is data. So I need this data in the payments, in the embedded.payments. This part. So what you can do for that, you go to the row selector in your data profile, and you type in this path in the JSON where you want the data from. So after that, you can replace your data profile. Okay, I went too fast. So you can push the button replace data profile, but you can only do this when you not have used this this web source in the reports, because then your columns are all in use. So we have to. Most probably you will do this only once, and after all, you use the extend data profile to add more columns or change columns. Okay, so now my data profile looks like this. And if you look in the fifth column, or fifth column, you see that this is the path, like the amount refunded .value. It's called value 2, and the amount remaining .value is called value 3. And that didn't mean much to me. So what I wanted to do, I want to change this names so the data profile variables were more natural. So I changed these names and also changed the order of the names. And then I came back with this list. So the wizard gave me a good start. And after that, I wanted to make it more like, more that I can also read it nice. Like amount remaining dot value now calls remaining underscore amount. So now later on, you will see this is much more convenient because we're going to use this these variables later on to assign values to it. Okay, so and now if I only had added columns, I could just synchronize columns on my interactive report, and then the columns will be added. So in this case, I have a new report. I refresh my page. You see, I have a lot of information about all the payments. So now I have my information. So that's great.
De enige optie die ik heb gevonden.
So now it's time to create a payment because I can list the payments. Now it's time to create one because this is a little bit more complicated. So I go back to the payments API and I read the information about how to create a payment. So in technique, I know a bit how it works, like using the curl and look at the response. But there's in creating a payment, there's some kind of workflow, and that I need to explain to you. So if the customer places an order on your web shop, then what we have to do, we have to create this payment at Molly with this call. Then we redirect our customer to the payment side of Molly, and the customer does his payment over there. So what Molly does, it calls your webhook, and what we need to do then, we need to check if this is really an order, and we can get the new statements, the statement like this order has been paid. If the order has been paid, Molly sends us back to the website, and we can thank our customer. And we end up with a happy customer. But what I see over here is that Molly calls your webhook. So what is a webhook? And there is practically one way to explain what a webhook is. So after the marriage of Shrek and the princess, the newly wedded were invited to the castle or the royal ball. And during this long travel to the castle, Donkey continuously asked, "Are we there yet?" Shrek was, "No." He said, "Are we there yet?" Shrek, "No, we are not." And Shrek was getting agitated, and the situation was not getting better. So, as always between those two, it ended up in like a sort of fight. So, it couldn't be better when Monkey was just lying in a meadow. And at the end of the trip, Shrek woke him up and said, "Hey, we are there." And then we were happy. It's much nicer. So you know what I mean. We're talking about pulling and pushing. So this is more like we are pushing the new status to our server. That is practically what webhooks does. So if you look at the definition of webhooks on the Molly side, we read that webhooks are used to process real-time status updates. For example, when a payment is paid. And it's a URL Molly will call with the ID of the updated object. And when Molly calls your webhook, you should fetch the latest status information of this order and process it if it was changed. So that is pretty what we need to do. And what Molly also says, well, this is a post. This is like, I copied this from their website. It's a post, HTML post. And of course, they send the ID of the Molly order. So that got me thinking. So if you post, you typically create something and you return it to a one created. If you do a get, you select something and then return it 200. And for puts, you update something, return it 200. With delete and patch, you also return it 200. Okay, it's done. But when we post a webhook, we do not create anything. So we obviously don't want to return 201 created. So in this case, Molly needs a 200. Okay, so we need to send the 200. Okay. Okay, so Molly tells the database, our web shop, that there is a status change on an order. We look up this ID in our database, and we make sure that we expect the status change. And if we allow it, then we retrieve this new status. So wouldn't be just nicer, less complicated, if Molly just says, well, the new status of this order is paid. Well, it can be, but it's not secure, it's not safe, because anyone can send you this message. What is safe is if Molly first calls your webhook, just to say, hey, there's a change in this order. You retrieve it because you know there's something going on in this order. And then the update is done in the database. That makes it secure. So Molly needs to call our database. So Molly needs to consume our database. For that, we can use the RESTful services. So if someone wants to, from outside the database, want to get some information about the database or in the database, you need the RESTful services. And at the beginning, your scheme may be not registered for ODS. So from the APEX screens, you can just push the button, register scheme with ODS, and you go to a small wizard where you can set up some details. What I recommend when you do this is install the sample service, because there's a lot of information and nice examples to test your connection and test your services. And then after this one window wizard, you are in the screen where you can create services. This, what I now did, you can also do from the command line. So for PL/SQL, you can enable your scheme. This is handy if you use your DTAP suite. So let's first test if the server is ready, if the connections are ready to get information from the database. So I looked into the examples and I saw that you can get the employees. So just open this information, and because it's a get, you can just copy it and put it in your URL from your browser. So this is the information you want to copy. You push the copy button and you paste it in your browser. And what you see, this is what it returns. So the connection works. ODS works. So now we try to get to make a copy of this service, and we make it more like our own. I use PL/SQL for that. We already enabled the scheme, but it doesn't hurt if you do it again. So for your installation script, maybe this is better. Then you define your module. So your module is more like we gather our templates in, like in this case, Molly. So I call my module Molly. Then you need to define the templates. So in this case, I copy the information of the employee info. So my template is called emp info. And then I want to attach the handler to this template. And in this case, you use the getter to get information about the employees. And you see there's a select star from M, and the source type is a SQL query. So what should the URL look like? Well, if you look how the URL is constructed, the first thing is the scheme URL mapping pattern. So that's the mapping pattern that we used in our in creation of the module. Then the module base path is the next one, and the last one is the template. So in this way, you can construct your URL, and you copy it to your browser, and you see that the result is there. So it's working. Great. So we tested this interface. Now we can create our webhook. And for this webhook, I use the same PL SQL code I used for the test. This code. And only the highlighted parts I will replace. So like the pattern will be the webhook, because that's a suitable name, I think. The method will not be a getter, but it will be post. And the source type, I changed it to PL SQL because I want to call my package that does their thing. And in this case, I only want to log the body text. That's enough for me right now. So you cannot create the URL right now and copy it into your browser, because then it will do a get. So there are a lot of API testing tools out there. You can choose one, make sure it does a post, copy your URL in it. And what we also need is we needed an ID or something, data sent with it. So I tested it at the apitester.com, and the result was 200 OK. Well, that was exactly what I needed. So I did a post, it sent some data, and I got back a 200 OK. So it suits the specifications. So now I'm ready to create a payment. I have my webhook ready, and I can create a payment. So in the payment API, we see there's a lot of examples. So there's a curl example, and it looks very complicated because all the -d and it's, yeah, well, this curl example will generate the JSON which will be sent to the server. There's also Node.js example, and in this Node.js example, I saw there's already a JSON in there. So we need to extract this JSON, and this JSON, this will be our base on how to create our data profile. So in our web source module, we can add an operation. And this operation, we need to give like a URL pattern for it. If you don't want a URL pattern, you just put a dot in there. And then it will not add anything to the existing URL. So the base URL is over there, and there will nothing be added. So the HTTP method we want to set is post, because we want to post something to the server, to Molly. And what we want to do, we want to insert a row in the database. We want to create a payment. And then the body template. So what should we put there? Well, that will be basically the JSON we need to send to the server. That's this part. This is the JSON. But then there's already some fixed amounts in here and fixed description, and we need to make this more variable. So what we can do, we can make hooks like this. And these are now the substitution strings we can define. So we copy this part into the data, into the request body template. And now we need to make a connection between these hooks between these substitution variables and the data profile. In your data profile, you can add all kind of parameters. So all the substitution values, we need to create a parameter for them. And I did it over here. And now, basically, your web service is done. But there's one more thing. Because I want to create something, I also get something back, and I need to know what Molly is returning to me to do something with it. So what I do, I create a module parameter. And in this module parameter, you can set up like what the result will be done. Like in response of the message I sent, there will be all the information. So the type will be response body, my variable name will be response, and I can use this later on in my application. So I add this parameter, and now we're almost done because the APEX part is already done. So I need to create a button that does the payment, and I need to create something that handles the payment. So in my page, I created a button and a dynamic action, and this dynamic action calls my package, my Molly package, which in his turn creates a payment. And it does it, it creates this payment by calling the web source. So these are the parameters we need to fill in first, because if we call the web source, we need to have some information to send. So what we first do in this custom package I created, I use the APEX exec package. Let's go back home. So I use the APEX exec package, and we need to set up the parameters. And after that, I need to set a value to all the parameters. And I can use different kinds. I can also set a default on the parameter, and then there's already a value in it. So in my package, I set all the values. And at the end, when all the values are gathered in this type, I use the APEX exec package to execute the web source. And here I use the static ID, says I need the post operation, and these are the parameters. And after that, I use the APEX exec package to get the result back. And that was the response parameter. And then I save this result, and I want to do something with it. And this result will be in JSON. So I need to convert this JSON somehow to my payment type, and then I can do stuff with it. I can log it, of course, but I can also use it to extend my data in the database. So this is the last technique I want to discuss. We are parsing the result we get from Molly. And this result, we need to parse JSON into my data type. So if we look into the create payment API, the result will look like this. So for that, I created this function, and this function is going to convert it to convert this JSON to the type. This is my type. It's a simple record with a few bits of information I needed. Well, the function body is pretty straightforward, and I want to do something like I select my order ID, a Molly, and paste from my into my payment record from some kind of JSON response. And in Oracle 12c, you can use the JSON table function for that. And the first parameter in this function will be your JSON. Now it's an input variable, but you can also use it from some SQL query. And the second parameter is the definition of all the columns we need to get from the JSON. So the $sign is the root path, and from there you can set all the columns. So the first one is the order ID. You see, I say over here, I call the order ID number, because in JSON everything is a varchar. Everything, it's one big club. So I say, okay, the order ID needs to convert it to a number, and the path it is in the root on the metadata and order ID. So the Molly ID is a varchar. Then you have to pay. Paid at is a timestamp. The status is there, and the check is cancelable. And of course, checkout URL. We need to have to do. So now this will work, but I think it's more nice if you make an alias and call it with an alias. And not to forget, the status always needs to be in uppercase. So in 12c it looks like this. In 18, you can skip the string notation and use the more convenient way of writing with the dot notation, except for the last line in this case, because the underscore is not allowed in the dot notation. You have to write it in the dot style. So from 18, you can use this one. Okay, so you have a little bit 2 minutes left, so we go to the summary. So what did we do? The customer, he wanted to buy something. He places an order. We create a payment. We use the web sources in there, and we use the APEX execute package for that. So Molly, we transfer the customer to the Molly page, and Molly does, I think, customer page, and they call our webhook. They call the webhook, which we made with the ODS RESTful services, and we retrieve the payment status. I didn't explain how to do that, but it works the same as the other examples, which we call a web source, and we use the APEX exec package. So at the end, we can redirect the customers redirected back to the screen, and we can thank the customer. We have a happy customer. So if we use external, if you consume external services, we use web sources for that. We can use the APEX exec package to call the web sources. And if someone wants to consume services in our place, we use ODS RESTful services for that. And after that, if you want to do something with JSON, you can use JSON in a database to parse the messages. And you can all try this out in the free cloud. So I did it. It worked like immediately. I had no security issues. Yeah, I would say look back into the presentation if you want to do something with it, and start trying. So thank you for being here. Let's go. If there are some questions, maybe there's for questions.
Yes, there's one question.
Yeah.
Yes, there's one question, and the question is, how is the API key secured within the database? It is encrypted or hashed?
Well, at the moment, my API key is just not secured, so it's just set up in the string. But I can imagine that you want to store this in the table, and you can yes, secure it. Yeah.
Okay. Then there's just one question right now. What about registration number when we create a POC?
Sorry, what about?
What about registration number when we create a POC?
I don't think I get the question. I hear you, but I don't know what Yeah.
Actually, I don't know either. Maybe proof of concept, the registration number.
Yeah, what I can give you an answer. I hope I answer his question with that. So what I did when I made a proof of concept, I just used a test environment, and you can with Molly, and I'm sure that with different providers you can do it also. There's this possibility to just use a test environment as if it was the real environment. So maybe the registration number, maybe is the API key, the authorization key. Yeah.
Maybe. But let's think that this that the API key is the registration number. Sounds so. Okay, then one last question. Do you have a real example where maybe the attendees can buy something with your payment guide?
I have nothing to sell.
Yeah, but maybe you did it for some customers or something else. But if you won't say it, it's okay.
Yeah, well, if you like follow the instructions, follow the examples in my presentation, you can set it up yourself pretty easy, I think. And that, yeah, I don't think if I created like a website where you can do it and where you can see it, that adds something. I was thinking about it, creating something like that. Yeah, but I'm not sure if it adds something. I think if you use the examples in my presentation, you reach pretty far with it. And about the authorization, you can also use OAuth for this. I didn't do it because my presentation will be longer than, and I needed to have 45 minutes, of course.
Okay, I can understand. Maybe for the future, you can build a website where we can give you a coffee or buy you a coffee, and then you have something to sell.
Yeah, I will try to think of it, and maybe I come up with something. But you can follow me on Twitter. If I have something, I will let everybody know.
Okay, great, thank you. And there's a little bit feedback. There's one guy who wants who would appreciate if you write a blog post about it, because it sounds really interesting, and maybe yeah, the others in the community can have the knowledge too.
Okay.
So
yeah,
thank you.
I will think about something to share this with everyone.
Great, thank you. Now we are finished, so we can go to the break and have some food, and then let's see us after the break. Bye bye.
Thank you all.